The fire had long since died in the hearth when Elowen woke that morning, her fingers stiff with cold, her breath visible in the gray pre-dawn light that filtered through the cracked window of her attic room. She lay still for a moment, listening to the sounds of the city stirring below, the clatter of cartwheels on cobblestone, the distant bark of orders from the garrison, the low, mournful howl of a wolf somewhere in the forest beyond the walls. 24 winters she had survived in the Blackpine Dominion, and each one had taught her the same lesson. Stay small, stay quiet, stay alive. Her room was barely large enough to contain the narrow cot she slept on, a wooden trunk that held her few belongings, and the makeshift shelves she had constructed from scavenged planks to hold her books and dried herbs. The walls were bare stone, perpetually damp, and the ceiling sloped so steeply that she could only stand upright in the center of the space. It was a servant's quarter, and not even a favored servant at that, but it was hers, and in the Blackpine Dominion, privacy was a luxury afforded to very few of her station. Elowen sat up slowly, wincing as her joints protested the movement. The cold settled into her bones each night, making mornings an exercise in coaxing her body back to function. She wrapped the thin blanket around her shoulders and moved to the window, looking out over the sprawling fortress city that had been both her prison and her sanctuary for as long as she could remember. The Dominion stretched before her in layers of gray stone and dark timber, buildings stacked against the mountainside like teeth in a predator's jaw. Beyond the outer walls, the Blackpine Forest rose in an endless sea of ancient trees, their branches heavy with snow even now in early spring. She had been found in those woods as a child, or so she had been told. No memory of parents, no knowledge of pack, no family name to anchor her to the intricate hierarchy that governed every aspect of life in the Dominion. The midwife who had taken her in, a gruff woman named Margit, who had more kindness than sense, had given her a surname plucked from the thorny vines that grew wild near the healer's cottage, Thornvale. It was a name that belonged to no bloodline, carried no weight, offered no protection. It marked her as packless, and in a society where wolf bonds and family ties determined everything from where you lived to whether you lived at all, being packless meant being nothing. Margit had died when Elowen was 16, succumbing to the same wasting sickness that took so many in the lower quarters where proper healers rarely ventured. Before she passed, she had taught Elowen everything she knew about herbs and healing, about the properties of roots and leaves, about which mushrooms could save a life and which would end it. That knowledge had been Elowen's salvation. When Margit died and the cottage was claimed by the Dominion's treasury, Elowen had presented herself at the infirmary with a basket of carefully prepared tinctures and a desperate offer. "Let me work, and I will keep your warriors alive." They had accepted, not out of kindness, but out of practicality. Healers were always needed, especially in a realm that seemed perpetually on the brink of war. But they had made it clear she was tolerated, not valued. She worked longer hours than the other assistants, received half the pay, and was given the tasks no one else wanted, harvesting in the poisonous sections of the medicinal gardens, treating the festering wounds of prisoners, preparing bodies for burial when healing failed. Elowen dressed quickly in the cold, pulling on the simple gray dress that marked her as infirmary staff, layering it with a worn woolen overdress and the leather apron she used for her work. She braided her dark hair tightly, pinning it at the nape of her neck, and splashed icy water from the basin on her face to chase away the last remnants of sleep. Her reflection in the small, tarnished mirror showed a face that had grown thin over the years, all sharp angles and shadowed hollows. Her eyes were too large for her face, a strange amber color that sometimes drew unwanted attention, so she had learned to keep them downcast. The infirmary was located in the eastern wing of the fortress, built against the outer wall where the stone ran thick and cold. Elowen made her way through the narrow servants' corridors, keeping to the shadows as she always did, avoiding the main passages where nobles and warriors walked with the confidence of those who belonged. She passed other servants, laundry maids, kitchen workers, messenger boys, but none met her eyes. Packless wolves were considered unlucky, tainted somehow, as if the absence of family bonds might be contagious. She arrived at the infirmary just as the head healer, Master Corvain, was beginning his morning rounds. He was a severe man with silver hair and the bearing of someone who had once held a higher position, though Eowyn had never learned what had brought him to this work. He nodded curtly at her arrival, a gesture that was neither warm nor cold, merely acknowledgement of a tool appearing where it was expected. "The southern garden needs harvesting," he said without preamble. "Comfrey root, yarrow, and elderflower. We're running low on poultices, and the garrison sent word they'll be conducting combat trials today. There will be injuries." Eowyn nodded, taking the basket he handed her. The southern garden was the least desirable of the infirmary's 3 medicinal plots, located outside the walls in a clearing that bordered the forest. It was exposed, isolated, and rumored to be haunted by the spirits of those who had died in the old battles fought on that ground. Most of the other assistants refused to go there alone. Eowyn didn't mind. The solitude suited her, and the dead had never troubled her the way the living did. She made her way through the fortress gates, nodding to the guards who barely glanced at her. The morning was bitter, the sky a flat gray that promised snow despite the calendar insisting spring had arrived. The path to the garden wound down the hillside, away from the walls and into the shadow of the trees. Eowyn walked with her head down, her boots crunching on the frost-hardened earth, her breath forming small clouds in the air. The garden appeared as a pocket of careful cultivation in the wilderness. Raised beds arranged in geometric patterns, each section marked with wooden stakes indicating what grew there. Eowyn set her basket down and knelt in the cold earth, her fingers working methodically to uncover the comfrey roots buried beneath the soil. The work was hard, and her hands quickly grew numb, but there was a meditative quality to it, a rhythm that allowed her mind to drift. She thought, as she often did, about what her life might have been if things had been different. If she had been born to a pack with a name that meant something. If her wolf had been strong instead of this weak, flickering presence that barely stirred within her. She had shifted only a handful of times in her life, and each time had been agonizing, her wolf form small and sickly, lasting only minutes before she collapsed back into her human shape, exhausted and aching. The pack healers who had examined her years ago had declared her defective, her wolf stunted by some unknown deficiency. It was another mark against her, another reason to remain invisible. The sound of hoofbeats pulled her from her thoughts. Eowyn looked up to see a group of riders approaching along the forest road, their mounts massive war horses that snorted steam into the cold air. The riders wore the black and silver of the Dominion's elite guard, and as they drew closer, Eowyn recognized the banner they carried, the crowned wolf of the royal household. She immediately lowered her gaze, making herself small as she always did when nobility passed. But the riders slowed as they neared the garden, and she heard the creak of leather as someone dismounted. Boots appeared in her line of vision, polished black leather trimmed with silver buckles. "You there!" a woman's voice, sharp and cold as a blade. "Stand when addressed by your betters." Eowyn rose slowly, keeping her eyes fixed on the ground. The woman who stood before her was tall and beautiful in the way of high-born wolves, her features sharp and aristocratic, her bearing radiating the confidence of someone who had never known want or fear. She wore riding leathers of fine black wool embroidered with silver thread, and her dark hair was pulled back in an intricate braid that probably took a servant an hour to create. Eowyn recognized her, Lady Seraine, daughter of the High Council's lead advisor, and one of the most prominent unmated females in the Dominion. "What business have you outside the walls?" Lady Seraine demanded, her pale eyes raking over Eowyn with obvious disdain. "Harvesting herbs for the infirmary, my lady," Eowyn said quietly, her voice carefully neutral. "By order of Master Corvain." "Packless," Lady Seraine said, and it wasn't a question. She could smell it on Eowyn, the absence of pack bonds, the isolation that clung to her like a stain. "Should you not be supervised? It is unseemly for your kind to wander freely." One of the other riders, a broad-shouldered man with a cruel mouth, laughed. "Perhaps she hopes to lose herself in the forest, my lady. Save us all the trouble of tolerating her presence." The others joined in the laughter, and Eowyn felt her face burn with humiliation. She said nothing, knowing that any response would only make things worse. Lady Seraine stepped closer, so close that Elowen could smell her perfume, something expensive and floral that seemed obscene in its richness compared to the scent of earth and herbs that clung to Elowen's own skin. "The mating ceremony is in 3 days," Lady Seraine said, her voice dropping to something that might have been mistaken for kindness by someone who didn't know better. "I suppose even creatures like you are required to attend. Do try not to embarrass yourself, Packless. The Alpha King has no patience for weakness, and you reek of it." She turned and remounted her horse in one fluid movement, and the group rode off without another word, leaving Elowen standing alone in the garden, her hands still dirty from the earth, her heart pounding with a mixture of shame and anger that she had no outlet for. The mating ceremony. She had heard the announcements, seen the preparations being made throughout the fortress. Once every decade, the Dominion held a grand ceremony where all unmated wolves of age were presented before the ruling Alpha, in the hope that the ancient mating bonds would manifest. It was part ritual, part political theater, and entirely compulsory for anyone who fell within the designated age range. Elowen had tried to avoid it, had even considered fleeing into the forest and not returning until it was over. But Master Corvain had made it clear that attendance was not optional. The Alpha King himself had decreed that every unmated wolf must be present, and to refuse was to invite punishment. She returned to her harvesting with renewed urgency, trying to lose herself in the work, trying not to think about the ceremony or the humiliation that surely awaited her there. By the time her basket was full, the sun had climbed higher in the sky, though it remained hidden behind the thick blanket of clouds. She made her way back to the infirmary, her shoulders aching from the cold and the weight of the harvest. The rest of the day passed in a blur of routine tasks. She processed the herbs she had gathered, grinding roots into powder, steeping leaves into tinctures, preparing the supplies that would be needed for the inevitable injuries from the combat trials. In the late afternoon, the wounded began to arrive. Warriors with split lips and broken noses, guards with deep gashes from practiced swords, one young fighter with a dislocated shoulder that made him scream when Master Corvain reset it. Elowen worked mechanically, her hands steady even when her mind wandered. She cleaned wounds, applied poultices, wrapped bandages with the efficiency of long practice. The warriors barely looked at her, and when they did, it was with the same dismissive glance one might give a piece of furniture. She was useful, nothing more. Night had fallen by the time she finished her work and returned to her attic room. She was exhausted, her body aching, her mind numb from the day's labor and the constant effort of remaining invisible. She ate a small meal of bread and cheese that she had saved from the infirmary's kitchen, then lay down on her narrow cot, pulling the thin blanket over herself. Sleep did not come easily. Her thoughts kept returning to the mating ceremony, to Lady Seraine's mocking words, to the prospect of standing before the Alpha King and the entire court, exposed and judged. She had never seen the king in person. Wolves of her station did not attend royal functions, did not move in those circles, but she had heard the stories. King Rurik Valamor was said to be the most powerful alpha the Dominion had known in a century, a warrior without equal, a ruler who had taken the throne at 25 after his father's death, and had spent the 7 years since consolidating power through a combination of strategic brilliance and ruthless force. They said he was cold, calculating, unmoved by sentiment or mercy. They said his wolf was enormous, black as midnight, with eyes that could see into the soul. They said he had never taken a mate despite the pressure from the council, that he showed no interest in the noble females paraded before him, that he seemed content to rule alone. And now, this ceremony, his advisors must have finally convinced him it was time, that the Dominion needed a queen, needed heirs, needed the stability that came from a mated Alpha King. Elowen pulled the blanket tighter around herself, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. In 3 days, she would stand in the Great Hall with hundreds of other unmated wolves, and the king's gaze would pass over her like she didn't exist. Because to him and to everyone else who mattered, she didn't. She would endure it because she had to, and then she would return to her attic room and her work and her invisible life, and nothing would change. She finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, her dreams filled with dark forests and golden eyes and a howling that might have been wind, or might have been something far more ancient calling out across the frozen night. The next 2 days passed in a mounting sense of dread that Elowyn could not shake. The entire fortress seemed to vibrate with anticipation, the excitement palpable among the nobles and high-ranking wolves who would attend the ceremony not as participants, but as spectators, there to witness the moment when the Alpha King finally chose his mate. Servants rushed through the corridors carrying bolts of fine fabric, casks of wine, crates of delicacies brought from across the realm. The Great Hall was being transformed, though Elowyn only glimpsed it from a distance. Walls hung with tapestries depicting the history of the Dominion, floors polished to a mirror shine, the massive throne at the far end draped in furs and crowned with antlers from some ancient beast. In the infirmary, Master Corvain was unusually tense, snapping at the assistants over minor infractions, muttering about the waste of resources when there were genuine medical needs going unmet. But even he could not escape the ceremony's reach. On the evening before the event, he called Elowyn into his office, a small cluttered space filled with books and specimen jars. "You will attend tomorrow," he said without preamble. "I know you are hoping to avoid it, but there is no exemption for infirmary staff. The decree was explicit." "I understand, Master Corvain," Elowyn said quietly. He studied her for a moment, his severe expression softening almost imperceptibly. "It will be uncomfortable," he said, and there was something in his tone that suggested he spoke from experience. "The ceremony is designed to overwhelm, to strip away pretense and expose the true nature of each wolf. Your condition will make it worse. The concentrated dominance of so many alphas in one space affects weaker wolves more severely." Elowyn felt a flutter of anxiety in her chest. She had not considered that aspect, had been so focused on the social humiliation that she had not thought about the physical toll. "What should I expect?" "Dizziness, possibly," Corvain said. "Difficulty breathing. Some wolves faint. If you feel yourself becoming overwhelmed, try to move to the periphery of the hall where the concentration of dominance is less intense. And for mercy's sake, do not draw attention to yourself," as if she would do anything else. Elowyn nodded and left the office, her dread deepening into something closer to fear. She spent the evening preparing as best she could, mending the one dress she owned that was not stained with work, trying to make herself presentable without having any of the resources that the noble females would employ. She braided her hair carefully, pinned it with the simple wooden clasps that had been Margit's, and looked at herself in the mirror with a critical eye. She looked exactly like what she was, a packless wolf of no consequence, trying desperately not to be noticed. The morning of the ceremony dawned cold and clear, the sky a brilliant blue that seemed almost mocking in its beauty. Elowyn dressed in her mended gray dress, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and made her way to the great hall with the crowds of other unmated wolves who had been summoned. The halls were packed with bodies, the air thick with competing scents and nervous energy. She recognized some faces from the lower quarters, servants and laborers and minor guards, but there were also nobles, the daughters and sons of powerful families, dressed in finery that probably cost more than Elowyn would earn in a lifetime. They were all funneled into the great hall through a series of side entrances, divided roughly by status, though no one stated it explicitly. Elowyn found herself pressed into a corner with the other low-ranking attendees, far from the center of the hall where the throne sat on its raised dais. The space was enormous, the ceiling soaring overhead with massive wooden beams carved with wolves and moons and ancient symbols. Torches lined the walls, their flames casting dancing shadows, and braziers filled with burning herbs sent up plumes of smoke that smelled of pine and something darker, more primal. The hall filled slowly. Hundreds of wolves packed into the space, the noise rising to a dull roar of conversation and speculation. Elowyn kept her eyes down, her arms wrapped around herself, trying to make herself as small as possible. But even from her corner, she could feel it beginning, the weight of dominance pressing down on the space like a physical force. The high-ranking alphas and betas were arriving, taking their places in the sections reserved for observers, and each one brought their own aura of power that added to the oppressive atmosphere. Her head began to ache, a dull throb behind her eyes. Her breathing felt restricted, as if the air had grown thicker. Around her, she saw other low-ranking wolves exhibiting similar signs of distress. Pale faces, trembling hands, eyes that darted nervously around the hall. The nobles, secure in their own power and bloodlines, seemed unaffected, their excitement evident in flushed cheeks and bright eyes. A horn sounded, 3 long notes that cut through the noise and brought instant silence. Every wolf in the hall turned toward the main entrance, and Elowen felt her heart begin to race. The members of the High Council entered first, 7 wolves of advanced age and considerable power, their robes embroidered with the symbols of their offices. They took their seats on either side of the throne, their faces impassive. The horn sounded again, and the Alpha King entered the Great Hall. Elowen had thought she was prepared. She had thought that after 24 years of surviving in the margins of the Dominion, she had developed enough resilience to withstand anything. She was wrong. The wave of dominance that preceded King Rurik Valamor was like nothing she had ever experienced. It hit her like a physical blow, driving the air from her lungs, making her knees buckle. Around her, she heard gasps and whimpers, saw wolves struggling to remain standing under the crushing weight of his presence, and he had not even looked in their direction yet. Through vision that had begun to blur at the edges, Elowen watched him walk the length of the hall toward his throne. He was tall, powerfully built, his body moving with the fluid grace of a predator. He wore black leather and dark furs. No crown or ornament needed to mark his status. His presence alone declared his authority. His hair was dark, falling to his shoulders, and even from a distance she could see the sharp angles of his face, the cold intensity of his expression. He reached the throne and turned to face the hall, and Elowen made the mistake of looking up at the same moment his gaze swept over the assembled wolves. His eyes, even across the distance, even through her deteriorating vision, seemed to glow with an inner light, a gold so bright it was almost amber. Wolf eyes, ancient eyes, eyes that had seen centuries of bloodshed and power. The pressure in the hall intensified. Elowen felt her legs give out completely. She tried to catch herself against the wall, but her hands wouldn't respond properly. The world tilted sideways, the sounds of the hall fading into a rushing in her ears like wind through the trees or water over stone. She was dimly aware of falling, of the cold stone floor rising up to meet her, and then there was only darkness and a strange sensation of being caught, of strong arms preventing her from hitting the ground, and a scent that cut through everything else. Pine smoke and iron and winter frost and something that made her weak wolf stir for the first time in years, lifting its head with a sound that might have been recognition or might have been a cry for help. Then nothing. Consciousness returned slowly, dragging Elowen up through layers of darkness like surfacing from deep water. The first thing she became aware of was warmth, genuine warmth, the kind she had not felt in years. The second was softness beneath her body, not the thin straw mattress of her attic room, but something that yielded and supported her weight with perfect comfort. The third was the scent, pine smoke and iron and winter frost, the same scent that had overwhelmed her in those final moments before she lost consciousness, now surrounding her completely, soaked into the very air she breathed. Her eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the dim light. She was lying in a bed, an enormous bed with posts carved from dark wood and hung with heavy curtains of midnight blue fabric. The ceiling above her was stone, massive blocks fitted together with such precision that not even a hairline crack showed between them. Firelight flickered somewhere to her left, casting dancing shadows across walls hung with tapestries depicting wolves running through moonlit forests. Elowen sat up carefully, her head spinning with the sudden movement. She was still wearing her gray dress, though someone had removed her boots and the shawl she had worn. The bed she occupied could have fit 6 people her size comfortably, the furs and blankets piled upon it worth more than everything she had ever owned combined. The room itself was vast, larger than the entire floor of the building where her attic room was located, furnished with heavy wooden pieces that spoke of age and quality. A massive wardrobe, a desk covered with maps and documents, chairs upholstered in dark leather and against the far wall, a weapons rack holding swords and daggers that gleamed with obvious care, This was not the infirmary. This was not anywhere she should be. Panic fluttered in her chest as memory returned. The ceremony, the overwhelming presence of the Alpha King, the sensation of falling. But she had fallen in the Great Hall, surrounded by hundreds of wolves. How had she come to be here, in this room that could only belong to someone of immense rank and power? "You are awake." The voice came from the shadows near the fireplace, deep and measured, and Elowen's head snapped toward it so quickly her vision blurred again. A figure stood there, tall and dark, and as he stepped forward into the light, Elowen felt her breath catch in her throat. King Rurik Valimor regarded her with those same golden eyes that had swept over the hall, but now they were focused entirely on her, and the weight of his attention was somehow worse than the general dominance he had projected before. He wore simpler clothing than he had during the ceremony, dark trousers and a loose shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms marked with scars and the dark lines of what looked like ritual tattoos. His hair was pulled back from his face, emphasizing the sharp planes of his features, the strong jaw, the mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. Elowen scrambled backward on the bed until her back hit the headboard, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break free from her chest. "Your Majesty," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. I apologize. I do not know how I came to be here. I should not." "You collapsed," Rurik said, his tone giving nothing away. He remained where he was, making no move to approach the bed, though his eyes never left her face. "During the ceremony, you fell, and I caught you before you struck the floor." The memory returned with sudden clarity, the sensation of strong arms, the scent that had made her wolf stir. "You," she said, and then immediately wished she had not spoken, because what right did she have to address him so familiarly? But he did not seem offended. If anything, something flickered in his expression, too quick to identify. "Yes, me." Elowen tried to make sense of this, tried to understand why the Alpha King himself would have been anywhere near the corner where she had been standing, why he would have caught a packless nobody instead of letting her fall as anyone else would have done. "I should return to my quarters," she said, beginning to slide toward the edge of the bed. "I have imposed on your hospitality, and I am certain you have more important matters to attend to." "Stop." It was not a shout, not even spoken particularly loudly, but the command in that single word froze her in place as effectively as if he had used physical restraint. Rurik took a step closer, then seemed to think better of it and remained where he was. "You will remain here until I understand what happened." "What happened was that I fainted, Your Majesty," Elowen said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I apologize for the disruption to the ceremony. It will not happen again." "You fainted because the concentration of dominance in the hall overwhelmed you," Rurik said, and there was something in his voice now, an edge of frustration or perhaps confusion. That much was clear. What is not clear is why, when you fell unconscious in my arms, my wolf recognized you as my mate. The words hung in the air between them. Impossible and terrible. Elowen stared at him, certain she had misheard, that her addled brain was inventing things that could not be real. "That is not possible," she said finally. "No," Rurik agreed, his eyes never leaving hers. "It should not be possible. And yet, here we are." Elowen shook her head, trying to clear it, trying to think through the panic that was rising in her throat like bile. "You are mistaken. I am packless, Your Majesty. I am nobody. The mating bond does not recognize wolves like me. It is meant for those with strong bloodlines, with power. I am aware of what the mating bond is meant for," Rurik interrupted, and now there was definite frustration in his voice. "I am also aware that it has never once responded to any of the noble females paraded before me over the past 7 years. And yet the moment you touched me, unconscious and reeking of fear, my wolf claimed you as his own. So you will forgive me if I do not accept your assertion that this is impossible." When I felt it happen, Elowen pressed herself harder against the headboard, as if she could somehow merge with the carved wood and disappear. This could not be happening. This was a nightmare, or a cruel joke, or some kind of test she did not understand. "I do not remember," she said desperately. "I do not remember you at all from the ceremony. I only remember falling." Something shifted in Rurik's expression. A flicker of what might have been pain or might have been anger, quickly suppressed. "Of course you do not," he said, his tone flattening back into careful neutrality. "You were unconscious. But I remember. I remember the moment my wolf rose to meet yours, the recognition that burned through every attempt at logic or reason. I remember carrying you from that hall while the entire court watched, bringing you to my personal chambers because the thought of leaving you in the infirmary with strangers made my wolf want to tear the fortress apart." He turned away from her then, moving to stand before the fireplace, his back rigid with tension. "I have spent the past several hours trying to understand this, trying to determine if it is some kind of trick, some plot by my enemies to place a spy in my household. But my wolf does not lie, and the bond does not make mistakes, no matter how inconvenient or impossible the match may seem." Elowen's mind raced, trying to find some escape from this situation, some way to make him see reason. "Your Majesty, I work in the infirmary. I harvest herbs and tend wounds. I live in an attic room and earn barely enough to feed myself. I cannot be your mate. The Dominion needs a queen who can strengthen alliances, who can bear strong heirs, who can stand beside you as an equal. I am none of those things." "No," Rurik said quietly, still not looking at her. "You are not. And yet here we are." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Elowen felt tears burning behind her eyes and forced them back through sheer will. She would not cry in front of the Alpha King. She would not add that humiliation to all the others this day had brought. "What happens now?" she asked finally, her voice small. Rurik turned to face her again, and she saw that he looked as trapped as she felt. A powerful alpha brought low by the whims of fate or biology or whatever force governed the mating bond. "Now," he said, "you remain here, under my protection, while we determine what to do about this situation." "I cannot stay here," Elowen protested. "The court people will talk, will assume. People will talk regardless of what you do," Rurik said flatly. "The moment I carried you from that hall, your fate was sealed. If I send you back to your attic room now, my enemies will assume you have been rejected, and they will destroy you simply to prove they can strike at me through any avenue. If you remain here, at least you are under my direct protection." "Protection from what?" Elowen demanded, fear making her bold. "What enemies? I am nothing to anyone. I have no value as a target." "You have value now," Rurik said, and there was something almost gentle in his voice, though his expression remained hard. "You have value because my wolf has claimed you, and that makes you a weakness that can be exploited. There are those in this court who would very much like to see me weakened, who have been waiting for years for an opportunity to strike. And I have just handed them one by dragging a Packless Omega from the ceremony floor and bringing her to my chambers." The reality of her situation began to settle over Elowen like a suffocating blanket. She had gone from invisible to the most visible person in the Dominion in a matter of hours, and she had no defenses, no allies, no resources to protect herself from the political machinations of a royal court. "I did not ask for this," she whispered. "Neither did I," Rurik said, and for the first time she heard something like sympathy in his voice. "But the bond does not ask permission. It simply is." He moved to the door then, and Elowen tensed, uncertain what he intended. But he only opened it and spoke to someone outside. Guards, she assumed, though she could not see them from where she sat. "Have food brought up," he ordered, "and water for washing. The lady will be remaining in my quarters for the foreseeable future." The lady. As if calling her that could make it true. Rurik closed the door and turned back to her. "You will want to clean yourself and eat something. It has been several hours since the ceremony. After that, we will discuss what comes next." "What if I refuse?" Elowen asked, though she knew it was futile. "What if I simply leave?" "Then you will be dead within a day," Rurik said bluntly. "Either by your own hand, unable to bear the separation from a mate bond you do not remember feeling, or by the hands of those who would use your death to destabilize my rule. So I suggest you do not refuse." He left then, disappearing through a side door that probably led to a bathing chamber or dressing room. leaving Eowyn alone in the vast bedroom with her thoughts spinning and her heart aching with a confusion she could not name. The food arrived shortly after, brought by servants who would not meet her eyes, who set down trays of bread and cheese and roasted meat and wine before fleeing as if her mere presence was dangerous. Eowyn forced herself to eat, though every bite felt like ash in her mouth, knowing she would need her strength for whatever came next. As she ate, she tried to understand what she was feeling. There should be something, should there not? If what Rurik said was true, if his wolf had recognized her as his mate, then should her wolf not feel the same pull? But when she turned her awareness inward, seeking that weak, flickering presence that was her wolf, she found it even more suppressed than usual, as if something was actively holding it down, keeping it from rising to meet its mate. The thought sparked a memory, Master Corvain's words about her condition, about the weakness that had plagued her since childhood. What if it was not weakness at all? What if something was deliberately suppressing her wolf, binding it, keeping it from manifesting properly? But that made no sense. Who would do such a thing to an orphaned child with no family and no value? And why? Rurik returned as she was finishing her meal, his expression still carefully neutral. He had changed into fresh clothing, and his hair was damp as if he had washed. "There is a bathing chamber through that door," he said, gesturing to where he had disappeared earlier. "Use whatever you need. I will have clothing brought for you." "I have clothing," Eowyn said quietly, "in my quarters, which you cannot access without being seen," Rurik said, "and I will not have it said that I allowed my mate to wear rags while living in my chambers." My mate. He said it so matter-of-factly, as if it were already established fact, rather than an impossible claim that had upended both their lives. Eowyn rose from the chair where she had been sitting, her legs unsteady. "Your Majesty..." "Rurik," he interrupted. "If you are to live in my chambers, you will address me by my name when we are alone." The informality felt wrong, dangerous, like crossing a line that could not be uncrossed. But she nodded, because what choice did she have? "Rurik," she said, tasting his name on her tongue, finding it strange and heavy. "I cannot be what you need me to be. I do not know how to be a queen, or a mate, or anything other than what I am. And what I am is not enough for this." Rurik studied her for a long moment, his golden eyes searching her face as if looking for something he could not quite find. "No," he said finally, "you are not enough, and I am not what you deserve in a mate. But the bond does not care about what we want or what we think we need. It simply is. So we will learn to live with it, or we will both be destroyed by it. Those are our options." He moved to the desk, putting distance between them, his attention shifting to the maps and documents spread across its surface. "Rest if you can. Tomorrow, the court will expect answers, and we will need to present a united front, whether we feel united or not." Eowyn wanted to argue, wanted to refuse, wanted to run back to her attic room and pretend none of this had ever happened. But the exhaustion that had been building all day finally overwhelmed her, and she found herself moving toward the bathing chamber simply because she did not know what else to do. The bathing room was as luxurious as the bedroom, with a large copper tub already filled with steaming water, shelves lined with soaps and oils, and thick towels warming near a small brazier. Eowyn undressed slowly, her hands shaking, and lowered herself into the water. It was almost too hot, but after years of washing in cold water from a basin, the heat felt like heaven against her aching muscles. She scrubbed herself clean, washing away the dirt and fear and confusion, though she knew it would return the moment she stepped from the tub. As she washed, she examined her body, looking for any mark or sign that might indicate a mating bond. She had heard stories. Wolves who had been claimed often bore marks, brands burned into their skin by the force of the recognition. But her skin remained unmarked, pale and smooth, and entirely ordinary. Perhaps Rurik was wrong. Perhaps what he had felt was a mistake, a momentary confusion brought on by the intensity of the ceremony. Perhaps when morning came, his wolf would realize its error, and she would be free to return to her invisible life. But even as she thought it, she knew it was false hope. The Alpha King did not make mistakes about mating bonds. And the look in his eyes when he had spoken of recognizing her, that had been truth. terrible and unavoidable. She dried herself and found a simple sleeping gown laid out on a chair, soft cotton that felt like silk against her skin. When she emerged from the bathing chamber, she found that Rurik had left the bedroom, the side door closed, giving her privacy. The fire had been built up, filling the room with warmth and flickering light. Eowyn approached the enormous bed with hesitation, uncertain if she was truly meant to sleep there. But exhaustion won out over uncertainty, and she crawled beneath the heavy furs, her body sinking into the mattress with a sigh. The bed smelled like Rurik, pine and iron and frost, and to her surprise, the scent did not frighten her. Instead, it calmed something deep inside her, some instinct she did not understand but could not deny. She fell asleep thinking of golden eyes and impossible claims, of a future she could not imagine, and a past she could not remember. And somewhere in the darkness of her dreams, her weak wolf lifted its head and howled for a mate it could not reach, separated by barriers it did not understand but could not break. When morning came, it arrived with shouting. Eowyn woke to the sound of raised voices beyond the bedroom door, male and female, arguing with a vehemence that cut through the fog of sleep like a blade. She sat up, disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was until she saw the carved bedposts and the tapestries, and remembered with a sinking feeling in her stomach. The Alpha King's chambers, the mating bond, the impossible situation that had no good solution. The door to the bedroom burst open and a woman strode in, tall and furious, her dark hair streaming behind her like a war banner. Lady Sarayne, the same woman who had mocked Eowyn in the garden, now looking even more formidable in her rage. Behind her came Rurik, his expression thunderous, and two guards who looked profoundly uncomfortable. "I said you could not enter," Rurik said, his voice low and dangerous. "And I said I do not take orders from anyone regarding matters that concern my future as your queen," Sarayne shot back, her pale eyes finding Eowyn in the bed and narrowing with contempt. "Is this truly the creature you have chosen? This packless nothing who cannot even remain conscious in your presence?" Eowyn felt her face burn with humiliation, but before she could speak, Rurik moved to place himself between Sarayne and the bed, his body a wall of protection. "You will address her with respect, or you will leave. Those are your options." Sarayne laughed, a sharp sound without humor. "Respect? For what? She has no name, no family, no power. She is a stain on your reputation, Rurik, and if you cannot see that, then your wolf has made you blind." "My wolf has made me certain," Rurik said coldly, "which is more than I have ever felt regarding any of the ambitious nobles who have thrown themselves at my feet hoping to claim the title of queen." The barb hit home, and Sarayne's face flushed with anger. "I have been groomed for this role since birth. My bloodline is impeccable, my training complete, my connections extensive. I could have made you the most powerful mated pair in the history of the Dominion. And you throw it all away for a packless Omega who will bear you nothing but weak airs and whispered mockery." "Enough," Rurik said, and the command in his voice made even Sarayne hesitate. "You will leave now, and you will spread no rumors about what you have seen here. If I hear that you have spoken against my mate in any capacity, you will find your family's position in court considerably less comfortable than it currently is." Sarayne's eyes blazed, but she was too politically astute to push further when the threat was that explicit. She turned her gaze to Eowyn one last time, and the hatred there was pure and venomous. "Enjoy your bed while you can, Packless. Even the Alpha King cannot protect you from what is coming." She swept from the room, the guards scrambling to follow her, and the door slammed shut with a finality that echoed through the chamber. Rurik remained standing where he was, his back to Eowyn, his shoulders rigid with tension. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "That is what I meant about enemies. Lady Sarayne has been positioning herself as my future mate for years, with the full backing of her father and the council. She will not accept this quietly." Eowyn pulled the furs up to her chin, suddenly very aware that she was wearing only a sleeping gown in the presence of the Alpha King. "Perhaps she is right," she said quietly. "Perhaps you should choose someone like her, someone who can actually help you rule." Rurik turned to face her, and the look in his eyes was complex: frustration and resignation and something else she could not identify. I did not choose this any more than you did, but the bond has been formed, and breaking it would destroy us both. So we move forward, or we die. Those are our only options. He moved to the wardrobe and pulled out clothing, a dress of deep blue wool, far finer than anything Aloan had ever worn. "Get dressed," he said, laying it across a chair. "The High Council has demanded an audience, and we cannot delay it any longer. They will want answers about what happened at the ceremony, and what I intend to do about it." "What will you tell them?" Elowen asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Rurik met her eyes, and in that moment, she saw the weight he carried, the burden of a crown that allowed for no weakness and no mistakes. "The truth," he said simply, "that my wolf has chosen you as my mate, and that I will honor that choice regardless of the political consequences. And you will stand beside me and say nothing unless directly addressed, because the moment you show weakness, they will use it to try to break us both." The council chamber was a circular room deep in the heart of the fortress, carved from the living rock of the mountain itself. The walls were lined with ancient tapestries depicting the founding of the Dominion, the great battles fought to establish wolf supremacy in the northern territories, the bloodlines that had ruled for generations. A massive round table dominated the center of the space, and seated around it were the 7 members of the High Council, each one a wolf of considerable age and power, each one looking at Elowen with varying degrees of suspicion and contempt. She stood beside Rurik at the head of the table, wearing the blue dress he had provided, her hair braided and pinned in the style Margit had taught her years ago. She kept her eyes downcast as instructed, her hands clasped before her, every muscle in her body rigid with tension. The weight of their combined dominance pressed down on her like a physical force, making it difficult to breathe, but she forced herself to remain standing, to show no weakness. Rurik stood with the confidence of someone who had never questioned his right to rule. His posture relaxed, despite the tension in the room. "You summoned me," he said, his tone making it clear he considered the summons an impertinence. "I assume you have questions about the ceremony." "Questions," said Councillor Thrain, a grizzled wolf with silver hair and scars that spoke of countless battles. "That is one way to phrase it, Your Majesty. We were witnesses to an unprecedented event. The Alpha King claiming a Packless Omega as his mate before the entire court. So yes, we have questions." "Then ask them," Rurik said flatly. Councillor Marin, a woman with sharp features and calculating eyes, leaned forward. "We wish to understand the nature of this bond. You claim your wolf recognized this female as your mate. Yet she bears no mark, shows no sign of reciprocal recognition. How do we know this is genuine and not some political maneuvering on your part?" "Political maneuvering," Rurik repeated, and there was ice in his voice. "You believe I would deliberately claim a Packless Omega with no family, no connections, and no political value as my mate for political advantage. Please, enlighten me as to what advantage such a move would provide." Marin's lips thinned, but she did not back down. "We do not presume to understand your motivations, Your Majesty. We simply note that the timing is convenient. The Council has been pressuring you to take a mate for years, and suddenly, during a ceremony you were reluctant to hold, you discover your mate among the lowest ranks of attendees. It appears suspicious." "My wolf does not care about your suspicions," Rurik said coldly. "The bond formed the moment she touched me. I felt it. My wolf knows it. That is all that matters." Councillor Dravos, a heavy-set man with a reputation for ruthlessness, spoke next. "And yet the female shows no sign of feeling this bond. She did not even remain conscious in your presence, Your Majesty. That suggests weakness, not compatibility. She collapsed because the concentration of dominance in the hall overwhelmed her," Rurik said, his jaw tight. "It is a known effect for wolves with suppressed abilities." "Suppressed abilities," Thrain echoed, his bushy eyebrows rising. "An interesting way to describe a defective wolf. We have looked into her history, Your Majesty. This Elowen Thornavale has no documented pack affiliation, no known parents, and a wolf so weak it barely manifests. She is everything a queen should not be. Elowen felt each word like a blow, but she kept her expression neutral, kept her eyes down. She had heard such assessments all her life. They should not hurt anymore. And yet they did. Her wolf is suppressed, not weak, Rurik said, and something in his tone made Elowen glance up at him in surprise. There is a difference. Suppressed by what? Maren demanded. And if her wolf is suppressed, how can the mate bond function properly? The bond requires both wolves to recognize and accept each other. If hers cannot even manifest, these are questions I intend to investigate, Rurik interrupted. But they do not change the fundamental truth. My wolf has claimed her. I will not reject that claim simply because it is politically inconvenient. Councillor Savine, the youngest of the 7 but no less formidable, spoke for the first time. Your Majesty, we are not suggesting you reject your mate. We are suggesting that perhaps this bond is incomplete, improperly formed due to the female's condition. If that is the case, then forcing it to completion could be dangerous for both of you. Perhaps it would be wise to delay any formal recognition until we can determine what is causing her suppression and whether it can be remedied. It was a reasonable suggestion, delivered in a reasonable tone, and Elowen felt a flicker of hope. If they delayed, if they gave her time, perhaps she could find a way out of this situation, a way to convince Rurik that this was all a terrible mistake. But Rurik's expression hardened. No, he said flatly. I will not leave her vulnerable to those who would use her to strike at me. She remains under my protection, in my chambers, as my recognized mate. That is not negotiable. Then you leave us with a problem, Your Majesty, Dravos said heavily. The Dominion has laws regarding mating bonds, particularly those involving the royal line. A mate must be able to stand as an equal, must be capable of bearing and raising strong heirs, must be able to contribute to the strength of the pack. This female meets none of those criteria. The laws were written when the understanding of mating bonds was limited, Rurik countered. We now know that the bond chooses based on factors beyond simple strength or political advantage. Compatibility of spirit, complementary abilities, the potential for balance between two wolves. These are the things that matter in a true mate bond. Poetry, Thrain said dismissively. The Dominion is not built on poetry, Your Majesty. It is built on strength, on bloodlines, on the careful cultivation of power through strategic alliances. Your father understood this. Your grandfather understood this. Every Alpha King in our history has understood this. And yet none of them found true mates, Rurik said quietly. They took political matches, bore heirs out of duty rather than bond, and created dynasties that were strong in appearance but hollow at the core. I will not continue that tradition. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken tension. Finally, Councillor Oren, who had been quiet throughout the exchange, spoke in a voice like gravel. What of the female herself? Does she accept this bond? Does she wish to be queen? All eyes turned to Elowen, and she felt her heart begin to race. Rurik had told her to say nothing unless directly addressed, and now she had been addressed by the council itself. She looked up slowly, meeting Oren's gaze. Seeing the calculation there, the test being laid before her, she began, her voice coming out rough and uncertain. She cleared her throat and tried again. I do not feel the bond, Counselor. I do not remember the moment His Majesty claims it formed. But I also do not presume to understand the workings of fate or magic. If the Alpha King's wolf has claimed me, then I will honor that claim to the best of my ability. It was a carefully neutral answer, committing to nothing while appearing to commit to everything. She saw Rurik's subtle nod of approval from the corner of her eye, but Maren was not satisfied. That is not what I asked. Do you wish to be queen? The honest answer was no. The honest answer was that she wished to return to her attic room and her work in the infirmary and her invisible life where the worst thing she had to fear was cold and hunger and loneliness. But honesty here would be suicide. I wish to serve the Dominion as I am called to serve it, Elowen said carefully, whether that is as a healer or as something more. Something more, Dravos repeated, his tone making it clear what he thought of that particular euphemism. Your Majesty, I must speak plainly. The court is already in an uproar over this situation. Lady Seraine's family is demanding answers. The noble houses who expected their daughters to be considered are crying foul. And the common wolves are confused about what it means that you have chosen one of their own. This situation is creating instability at a time when we can least afford it. Then the court will have to adjust, Rurik said coldly. I am the Alpha King. My wolf has chosen. That is the beginning and end of the discussion. Is it? Savine asked softly. Because there is precedent for the council to intervene if they believe a mating bond will harm the Dominion. It has not been invoked in over a century, but the law remains on the books. The threat hung in the air, unspoken but clear. Rurik's eyes narrowed. You would dare to invoke the severance clause? We would dare to remind you it exists, Savine said evenly. If the council unanimously agrees that a mating bond poses a direct threat to the stability of the realm, they have the authority to mandate separation, even if it means the death of one or both parties involved. Alawan felt the blood drain from her face. Death. They were talking about killing her, or killing Rurik, or killing them both, as casually as discussing the weather. Rurik's hand found hers, his fingers closing around her cold ones with surprising gentleness. The council will not vote unanimously, he said, his voice deadly quiet, because I will ensure that at least one of you remembers what happens to wolves who threaten the Alpha King. The tension in the room ratcheted up another notch, dominance rolling off Rurik in waves that made even the counselors shift uncomfortably in their seats. Alawan felt her knees begin to buckle under the pressure, but Rurik's hand tightened on hers, anchoring her, keeping her upright. This is getting us nowhere, Orin said finally, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Your Majesty, we are not your enemies. We serve the Dominion as you do. But we need more than your word that this bond is genuine and viable. Give us proof. Show us that this female can be more than she appears. Give her time to find her wolf, to manifest the strength that you claim is merely suppressed. If she can do that, then perhaps the court will accept her. And if she cannot? Rurik demanded. Orin spread his hands. Then we will revisit this conversation with the knowledge that you did everything possible to honor your bond. But that fate itself deemed it impossible. It was a trap, Elowen realized. They were giving Rurik an impossible task, forcing her weak, suppressed wolf to manifest fully, knowing she would fail. And when she failed, they would use that failure to justify separating the bond, removing her from the picture, and forcing Rurik to choose a more suitable mate. But before she could speak, before she could tell Rurik that she could not do what they asked, he spoke. Done, he said flatly. You will have your proof, but you will give us time. The lunar convergence is in 3 months. By then, Elowen will have found her wolf, or we will know definitively that it cannot be done. 3 months. It might as well have been 3 days for all the chance she had of success. But the council members were nodding, seeing this as a victory, a delay that would inevitably lead to the outcome they desired. Very well, Thrain said, rising from his seat. 3 months, Your Majesty. We will reconvene at the lunar convergence to assess the situation. In the meantime, the female will remain in your chambers under your protection, but she will not be formally presented as your mate or future queen. That title must be earned. The other counselors rose as well, filing out of the chamber one by one, each casting a last measuring look at Elowen as they passed. When the last one had gone and the door had closed behind them, Rurik finally released Elowen's hand, and she nearly collapsed against the table, her legs shaking with the effort of remaining upright. That went poorly, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. That went exactly as I expected, Rurik said grimly. They wanted to invoke the severance clause immediately. I bought us time. Time for what? Elowen demanded, turning to face him. Time for me to fail? Because I will fail, Rurik. My wolf has been weak my entire life. 3 months will not change that. Your wolf is not weak, Rurik insisted, and there was a certainty in his voice that she could not understand. It is bound, suppressed, and we are going to find out why and break whatever seal is holding it down. How? Elowen asked desperately. I have been examined by healers before. They found nothing unusual, just weakness. Then they were looking in the wrong place, Rurik said. He moved to the door, opening it to reveal the 2 guards waiting outside. Summon Master Corvain from the infirmary. Tell him the Alpha King requires his expertise immediately. The guards bowed and departed, and Rurik turned back to Eowyn. Your employer knows more about herbs and healing than anyone in the Dominion. If there is something suppressing your wolf, some poison or binding spell that manifests as physical weakness, he will know how to identify it. Eowyn wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that there was an answer, a solution, a way out of this impossible situation that did not end in death or separation or exile. But hope was a dangerous thing for someone who had learned to survive without it. What if he finds nothing? She asked quietly. What if I really am just broken? Rurik crossed the room to stand before her, and for the first time since this nightmare began, his expression softened into something almost kind. Then we will find another way, he said simply, because breaking this bond would kill us both, and I am not ready to die. Are you? Eowyn thought about her attic room, her invisible life, the endless days of work and cold and loneliness. She thought about Margit, who had shown her kindness in a world that had shown her none. She thought about the herbs in her basket, and the wounded warriors she tended, and the small satisfactions of a life lived in the margins. No, she said finally. I am not ready to die. Good, Rurik said. Then we fight. Together. Master Corvain arrived within the hour, his expression carefully neutral as he was escorted into Rurik's chambers. His eyes found Eowyn standing near the fireplace, still wearing the blue dress, still looking like an imposter in surroundings far too fine for someone of her station. Your Majesty, Corvain said, bowing to Rurik. You summoned me. I did, Rurik said. I need your expertise regarding Eowyn's condition. You have supervised her work for years. You must have observations about her wolf, her health, anything unusual you have noticed. Corvain's gaze shifted to Eowyn, and she saw something flicker in his eyes. Concern, perhaps, or recognition that she had crossed some invisible line from which there would be no return. May I speak frankly, Your Majesty? I insist upon it, Rurik said. Corvain moved closer to Eowyn, his healer's eyes examining her with the same clinical detachment he used when treating patients. Eowyn has always been fragile, he said carefully. Her wolf manifests poorly, her shifts are painful and incomplete, and she tires more easily than she should given her age and overall health. I have long suspected that something was interfering with her natural wolf abilities, but without knowing her parentage or medical history, I could never determine the cause. What kind of interference? Rurik demanded. Poison? A curse? Possibly, Corvain said. Or a hereditary seal. Such things are not unheard of, particularly among bloodlines that were deemed dangerous or unstable. If Eowyn's parents or grandparents were subjected to such a seal, it could have passed to her through the blood, suppressing her wolf to prevent it from manifesting dangerous abilities. Eowyn felt something cold settle in her stomach. Dangerous abilities? My parents were dangerous? I do not know, Corvain said gently. You were found in the forest as a child with no memory and no identification. But the fact that someone went to the trouble of suppressing your wolf so thoroughly suggests you come from a line that someone feared. Rurik began to pace, his mind clearly working through the implications. Can the seal be broken? That depends on how it was cast and by whom, Corvain said. If it is a blood seal, tied to her lineage, then discovering her true heritage might be the key. If it is a spell seal, then we would need to identify the magical signature and find a counterspell. If it is a poison or alchemical suppression, then purging her system might work, though that carries its own risks. Then we start with what we can control, Rurik said decisively. Can you examine her blood? Look for traces of poison or alchemical compounds? I can, Corvain said. But Your Majesty, I must warn you, if this seal has been in place since childhood, breaking it suddenly could be dangerous. Her wolf has been suppressed for so long that releasing it all at once might cause her body to reject the transformation entirely. What are the alternatives? Rurik asked coldly. Leave her as she is and watch the council invoke the severance clause in 3 months? I think not. Corvain inclined his head in acknowledgement. Then we proceed carefully. I will need to take samples, examine them thoroughly. It may take weeks to identify what we are dealing with. You have 3 months, Rurik said. Use them wisely. As Corvain prepared his instruments, drawing vials from the bag he had brought with him, Elowen found herself staring at the fire, her mind spinning with this new information. A hereditary seal, parents who might have been dangerous, a past that had been deliberately erased. Who had she been before she was found in the forest? And who had wanted to make sure she never became that person again? Corvain's examination was thorough and uncomfortable, involving needles and probing questions about her health history and symptoms she had experienced over the years. Through it all, Rurik stood nearby, his presence a constant reminder of what was at stake. When it was finally done, Corvain packed his instruments and bowed. I will begin my analysis immediately, Your Majesty. If there is anything to find, I will find it. See that you do, Rurik said. And Corvain? This investigation is to remain absolutely confidential. If word gets out that we are looking into Elowen's heritage, it could endanger her further. Corvain's expression grew grave. Understood, Your Majesty. I will tell no one. After he left, silence fell over the chamber. Elowen remained by the fire, exhausted by the day's events, overwhelmed by the revelations about her past and the impossible task that lay before her. Rurik moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat of his body, but not touching. You should rest, he said quietly. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges. I do not think I can rest, Elowen admitted. My mind will not stop spinning. Then sit with me, Rurik said, gesturing to the chairs near the fire. And tell me about your life before all this. I would know more about the woman my wolf has chosen, even if she does not remember choosing me in return. It was a strange request, intimate in a way that made Elowen uncomfortable, but she found herself moving to the chair and sitting, and when Rurik prompted her with gentle questions, she found herself talking about Margit and the herbs and the infirmary, about the cold attic room and the invisible life she had built, about the small joys she had found in a world that had given her so little. And as she talked, she watched Rurik listen, really listen, his golden eyes intent on her face, and she thought that perhaps, just perhaps, this might not be entirely terrible. If she had to be bound to someone by forces beyond her control, at least he seemed willing to see her as more than just an inconvenient mate. It was a small comfort. But in a life that had offered her so few comforts, she would take what she could get. The days that followed settled into a strange rhythm that felt both unnatural and oddly comfortable. Elowen remained in Rurik's chambers, occupying the vast bedroom while he took to sleeping in an adjoining study that had been hastily converted with a cot and basic furnishings. It was an arrangement born of practicality rather than propriety. He could not send her back to her attic room without exposing her to danger. But neither could they share a bed when the bond remained incomplete, and her wolf lay dormant beneath layers of suppression. The court watched them with hungry eyes, waiting for signs of weakness, for cracks in the facade they presented. Lady Seraine in particular seemed to haunt the corridors outside Rurik's chambers, always finding reasons to be nearby, always accompanied by her father or other council members, always wearing expressions that ranged from barely concealed contempt to calculating interest. Elowen learned to navigate the fortress like a ghost, moving through servants' passages when possible, keeping her head down when forced to use the main corridors, speaking to no one unless absolutely necessary. But in the privacy of Rurik's chambers, something unexpected began to develop. They talked. In the evenings, after Rurik returned from his duties and Elowen finished whatever tasks she had been given to occupy her time, they would sit by the fire and share pieces of their lives. He told her about growing up as the heir to the Dominion, the weight of expectations placed on him from birth, the loneliness of being groomed for a throne that allowed no true companions. She told him about Margit's kindness, about learning to read from stolen books, about the satisfaction of identifying a rare herb or successfully treating a difficult wound. They were careful with each other, circling around the enormous fact of the bond, like two wolves uncertain whether to fight or flee. But gradually, Eowyn found herself growing less afraid of him. She began to see past the cold exterior he presented to the court, recognizing it for the armor it was. Beneath the Alpha King was simply Rurik, a man who carried too much responsibility, who had never been allowed to be anything other than perfect, who looked at her sometimes with an expression that suggested he was as bewildered by this situation as she was. Master Corvain visited regularly, always under the pretense of checking on the Alpha King's health, but actually there to examine Eowyn's blood samples and report his findings. After 2 weeks, he arrived with news that changed everything. "I found something," he said without preamble, spreading documents across Rurik's desk. "Not poison, not exactly, but a compound in her blood that I have never seen before. It appears to be binding to her wolf essence, creating a barrier that prevents full manifestation." Rurik leaned over the documents, his eyes scanning the diagrams and notes with the intensity of someone who had been trained to absorb tactical information quickly. "Can it be removed?" "That is the question," Corvain said carefully. "The compound appears to be of alchemical origin, but the formula is ancient, predating anything in my references. I believe it was administered to her as a child and has been reinforced periodically ever since, likely through environmental exposure." Eowyn felt her blood run cold. "Environmental exposure? You mean someone has been continuing to suppress my wolf all these years?" "Not necessarily deliberately targeting you," Corvain said. "But yes, something in your environment has been maintaining the suppression. Food, water, even the air you breathe in certain locations could carry trace amounts of the compound." "The infirmary," Eowyn said suddenly, the pieces clicking together. "I have spent almost every day there for 8 years. And before that, I lived with Margit in her cottage, which was near the infirmary gardens." Corvain nodded slowly. "It would make sense. The medicinal gardens contain many plants with powerful properties. If someone wanted to maintain a suppression without direct contact, contaminating a specific area would be an effective method." "Who would do such a thing?" Rurik demanded, his voice tight with anger. "And why?" "Those are questions I cannot answer," Corvain said. "But I can tell you this. The compound is breaking down. Ever since Eowyn left the infirmary and has been living here in your chambers, away from the source of contamination, her blood levels have been dropping steadily. In another month or two, the suppression may weaken enough for her wolf to begin emerging naturally." Hope flared in Eowyn's chest, so sudden and fierce it almost hurt. "Truly, my wolf could manifest on its own?" "It is possible," Corvain said, though his expression remained cautious. "But I must warn you both. The process may not be gentle. If this suppression has been in place since early childhood, her wolf has never had the chance to develop properly. When it finally breaks free, it could be unstable, unpredictable. She may experience painful shifts, loss of control, even temporary madness as her human and wolf halves struggle to integrate." "I will take that risk," Eowyn said immediately. "Anything is better than remaining like this." Rurik's hand found hers, his fingers threading through hers with a naturalness that surprised her. "We will face it together," he said firmly. "What can we do to accelerate the process safely?" Corvain considered. "Keep her away from the infirmary entirely. I will arrange for her samples to be taken elsewhere. Ensure she has access to fresh air and sunlight. Wolf manifestation is tied to lunar cycles, and exposure to natural light will help. And..." He hesitated, glancing between them. "What?" Rurik demanded. "Physical contact with her mate would help," Corvain said carefully. "The mate bond creates a resonance between two wolves. If your wolf calls to hers, it may help draw hers to the surface. But again, this must be done carefully. Too much stimulus and you could trigger an incomplete shift that damages her permanently." After Corvain left, Eowyn found herself acutely aware of Rurik's presence in a way she had not been before. The idea that touching him, being near him, could help her wolf emerge was both thrilling and terrifying. She looked at their joined hands, realizing they were still holding on to each other, and wondered when that had started to feel normal. "We should begin tomorrow," Rurik said, following her gaze. "I will clear my schedule in the afternoons. We can spend time together, allow the bond to strengthen naturally." What will people think? Alowan asked. If you suddenly start spending all your time with me? Let them think what they will, Rurik said. We have 3 months to prove you can be a viable mate and queen. We cannot afford to waste time worrying about court gossip. The next afternoon, Rurik took her to a private garden that occupied a terrace high on the fortress walls. It was a space clearly designed for the royal family, with carefully cultivated flower beds, stone paths, and a view of the forest that stretched to the horizon. The spring sun was warm on Elowen's face, the first genuine warmth she had felt in months, and she turned her face toward it gratefully. I did not know this place existed, she said, looking around at the beauty surrounding them. Few do, Rurik said. My mother used to bring me here when I was young before she died. It has been locked since then. I am the only one with the key. The admission was offered quietly, a piece of his past shared like a gift. Elowen understood that he was trying, in his own way, to make this easier for her, to give her space away from the judgment of the court, to show her that there were places in the Dominion that could be beautiful rather than harsh. They walked the paths together, Rurik pointing out plants his mother had favored, sharing memories of a childhood that had been too brief and a loss that still marked him. And as they walked, their hands found each other again, and Elowen felt something stir deep inside her. Not her wolf, not yet, but something. A warmth that had nothing to do with the sun, a sense of connection that she had never felt with anyone except perhaps Margit in those early days. Tell me about the bond, she said suddenly. What does it feel like for you? What did you feel when it formed? Rurik was quiet for a long moment, considering his words. Certainty, he said finally. I have spent 7 years making decisions that affect thousands of lives, balancing political necessities against personal desires, trying to be the leader the Dominion needs. And in all that time, I have never felt truly certain about anything. But when you fell against me in that hall, when my wolf recognized you, for the first time in my life, something felt absolutely right, inevitable, like finding something I did not know I had been missing. His golden eyes met hers, and she saw vulnerability there, carefully controlled but present nonetheless. I know you do not feel it yet. I know this is unfair to you, to be bound to someone you did not choose, someone you barely know. But I want you to understand that for me, this is not a political calculation or a strategic decision. This is my wolf claiming his mate, and I will do everything in my power to protect that claim. Elowen's throat tightened with emotion. No one had ever fought for her before. No one had ever considered her worth protecting. I want to feel it, she admitted. I want to understand what you feel. But there is just nothing. Emptiness where I think the bond should be. That will change, Rurik said with conviction. When your wolf emerges, you will feel it. And I will be here, waiting. They continued their afternoon walks every day after that. Sometimes in the garden, sometimes along the fortress walls, occasionally venturing into the forest itself with a full complement of guards trailing at a discreet distance. Rurik was always careful with her, never pushing for more contact than she was comfortable with, but always there, a steady presence that began to feel less like a captor and more like an ally. In the evenings, he taught her things she would need to know as a potential queen, the history of the Dominion's ruling families, the delicate balance of power between the council and the throne, the various political factions vying for influence. She absorbed it all with the same focus she had once applied to learning about herbs and healing, understanding that knowledge was a weapon and she was desperately in need of weapons. But the nights were hardest. Alone in the vast bedroom, lying in sheets that smelled of pine and frost, Elowen would turn her awareness inward, searching for any sign of her wolf. Sometimes she thought she felt something, a flicker of movement, a distant howl, but it always slipped away before she could grasp it, leaving her frustrated and afraid that perhaps Corvain was wrong, perhaps the suppression was permanent, perhaps she would fail, and the council would invoke their severance clause, and everything would have been for nothing. 4 weeks into their 3-month deadline, Lady Seraine made her move. Elowen was returning from the library where she had been studying the histories Rurik had assigned her when she found her path blocked by Seraine and 3 other noble females, all dressed in the height of court fashion, all looking at Elowen like she was something distasteful they had found on their shoes. "The packless pretender," Serene said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "How convenient to find you alone. We have been wanting to have a word with you." Elowen kept her expression neutral, her body language submissive. "Lady Serene, if you will excuse me, I have duties to attend to." "Duties?" One of the other women, Lady Kessa, daughter of Councillor Dravos, laughed sharply. "Is that what you call warming the Alpha King's bed? Spreading your legs and hoping he will be too blinded by lust to notice your inadequacies?" Heat flooded Elowen's face. "I share no bed with His Majesty," she said quietly, keeping her eyes down. "Our arrangement is one of protection, nothing more." "Protection," Serene repeated mockingly. "From what? The truth? The reality that you are completely unsuitable as his mate? That every day you remain in his chambers, you weaken his position and make him a laughingstock among the other packs?" "The bond chose me," Elowen said, hating how weak her voice sounded. "I did not ask for this. The bond chose poorly," Serene said coldly, stepping closer. "And everyone knows it. Do you truly believe that in 2 months, when the lunar convergence comes, you will suddenly manifest some impressive wolf and prove yourself worthy? You are delusional. You will fail, the council will separate the bond, and Rurik will finally be free to choose a proper mate. And you think that will be you?" Elowen asked, finding a small spark of defiance. Serene's smile was sharp and predatory. "Of course it will be me. I have been groomed for this role my entire life. My bloodline is impeccable, my training complete, my connections vast. I am everything you are not. And once you are gone, Rurik will see that our match is the one that was always meant to be." "Then why are you here?" Elowen asked, meeting Serene's gaze directly for the first time. "If you are so confident in your inevitable victory, why waste time threatening me?" For just a moment, something flickered in Serene's eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps, or fear. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by cold fury. "Consider this a kindness," she said. "A warning. The lunar convergence will be held at the Temple of the First Moon, deep in the forest. It is a sacred site, ancient and powerful, and the ritual conducted there will expose every weakness, every flaw, every inadequacy. If you have any sense of self-preservation, you will leave now, before you are forced to endure that humiliation before the entire court." "I am not leaving," Elowen said, surprised by her own conviction. Serene's expression hardened. "Then you are a fool. And when you fail, when the ritual proves what we all already know, that you are nothing but a packless omega with delusions of grandeur, I will be there to watch, and I will enjoy every moment of your destruction." She turned and swept away, her entourage following like ducklings, leaving Elowen standing alone in the corridor, her heart pounding and her hands shaking. She made her way back to Rurik's chambers as quickly as she could, barely making it through the door before her knees gave out and she collapsed against the wall. Rurik found her there minutes later, still trembling, and immediately knelt beside her. "What happened? Are you hurt?" "Serene," Elowen managed. She threatened me, told me I would fail at the convergence, that I should leave before I am humiliated." Rurik's expression went absolutely cold, a fury in his eyes that Elowen had never seen before. "Did she touch you?" "No," Elowen said quickly. "Just words. But Rurik, she mentioned something about the Temple of the First Moon, about a ritual. What is she talking about?" Rurik helped her to her feet and guided her to a chair, then began to pace, his movements sharp with barely contained rage. "The lunar convergence is more than just a deadline," he said. "It is a ceremony, one of the oldest in the Dominion. All mated pairs are required to attend and renew their bonds under the light of the full moon. It is also when new bonds are tested, to ensure they are genuine and strong enough to withstand the pressures of time and distance." "Tested how?" Elowen asked, dread settling in her stomach. "The couple must shift together and hunt together, demonstrating the coordination and connection that marks a true mate bond," Rurik said. "It is meant to be a beautiful ceremony, a celebration of the bond. But in our case, He trailed off, the implication clear. In our case, it will expose that I cannot shift properly and that the bond is incomplete, Elowen finished. And the council will use that as justification to invoke the severance clause. That is their plan, Rurik agreed grimly. But it will not work, because we have 2 months to ensure your wolf emerges, and by the time the convergence arrives, you will be able to shift and hunt and prove to everyone that our bond is as legitimate as any in the Dominion's history. His confidence should have been reassuring. Instead, it only highlighted the impossibility of the task before them. Elowin had never successfully completed a shift, had never held her wolf form for more than a few agonizing minutes. And now she was expected to not only shift, but hunt alongside the most powerful alpha in the north, all while being watched by a court that wanted nothing more than to see her fail. I cannot do this, she whispered. Rurik, I cannot. He stopped pacing and came to kneel before her chair, taking both her hands in his. Yes, you can. Because the alternative is death, and I told you before, I am not ready to die. Are you? She looked into his golden eyes and saw absolute conviction there, a belief in her that she did not share but desperately wanted to. No, she said finally, I am not ready to die. Then we fight, Rurik said, echoing his words from weeks before. We have 2 months. Corvain says your blood levels are dropping. We will increase your time outside, increase our contact, do everything possible to help your wolf surface. And when the convergence comes, you will shift, and we will hunt, and we will show the entire court that fate chose correctly. That night, as Elowen lay in bed trying to quiet her racing thoughts, she felt it, a definite stirring deep inside, stronger than before. Her wolf, responding to the fear and the challenge and perhaps to the determination in Rurik's voice. It was still weak, still suppressed, but it was there, trying to claw its way to the surface. She closed her eyes and reached for it, sending thoughts of encouragement, of welcome. Come back to me, she thought. I need you. We need you. The wolf stirred again, and for just a moment, Elowen felt a flash of sensation, the memory of running through forest undergrowth, the taste of fresh meat, the joy of pack bonds. But it was not her memory. It was too old, too distant, belonging to someone else, belonging perhaps to whoever she had been before the suppression, before she was found in the forest with no name and no past. Who are you? She asked the wolf silently. And who was I? But the wolf had no answers, only an overwhelming sense of urgency, of time running out, of a destiny that waited in the darkness beyond the suppression, ready to emerge whether she was ready for it or not. The weeks that followed were a blur of training and study and desperate hope. Rurik arranged for them to spend increasing amounts of time together, citing the need to strengthen the bond. They took meals together, studied together, even began to share the same space in the evenings without the careful distance they had maintained before. Physical contact became more frequent. Hands clasped during walks, his arm around her shoulders when the evening grew cold. Small touches that seemed innocent, but sent warmth spreading through Elowen's body. And slowly, gradually, she began to feel something. Not the bond itself, not yet, but an awareness of Rurik that went beyond the physical. She could sense his moods, could tell when he was troubled even before he spoke. Sometimes she would reach for him before he reached for her, as if her body knew what her mind had not yet accepted, that this man was meant to be hers, and she was meant to be his. Her wolf grew stronger. She could feel it now, not just as a distant presence, but as a living thing inside her, pushing against the barriers that held it down. The shifts, when they came, were still painful and incomplete, but they lasted longer, minutes instead of seconds. She could hold her pause for a brief time, could feel her senses sharpen, could catch the scent of forest and stone and Rurik's distinct signature, but she could not complete the transformation. Her body would shift partially, a limb here, claws there, but never the full change that would allow her to hunt and run and prove the bond's legitimacy. With 4 weeks left until the convergence, Corvain delivered troubling news. The suppression is breaking down, but not fast enough, he said, his expression grave. At the current rate, you will have partial shifting capability by the convergence, but not full transformation. And the ritual requires full shifts from both partners. Then we accelerate the process, Rurik said immediately. How? Corvain asked. We are already doing everything possible short of directly poisoning her system to flush the compound faster, and that carries too much risk of permanent damage. Aloan's mind raced, thinking through everything she had learned about alchemy and healing. What if we do not try to flush it? She asked slowly. What if we overwhelm it instead? Both men looked at her. Explain, Rurik said. The compound binds to my wolf essence, Elowen said, working through the logic as she spoke. But Corvain said the mate bond creates resonance between two wolves. What if we use that resonance to amplify my wolf's presence? If Rurik's wolf calls strongly enough, if the bond pulls hard enough, maybe my wolf will respond with enough force to break through the remaining suppression. Corvain looked thoughtful. It could work, but it would require the bond to be much stronger than it currently is. You would need to complete the mate bond fully. The implication hung in the air. Completing the bond meant more than just acknowledgement. It meant claiming each other physically, creating a connection so deep that breaking it would destroy them both. Elowen's face flushed, but she forced herself to meet Rurik's eyes. Would that work? Yes, Rurik said quietly, his gaze intense. A completed bond is exponentially stronger than an acknowledged one. If we complete it, the resonance would be powerful enough to call your wolf regardless of the suppression. The decision hung between them like a living thing, heavy with implications. Corvain excused himself quietly, leaving them alone in the vast chamber with only the crackling fire for company. Elowen's heart hammered in her chest as she tried to process what completing the bond would mean. The intimacy, the permanence, the absolute commitment to a man she had known for barely 2 months. You do not have to decide now, Rurik said, though his voice was rough. This is not something to be undertaken lightly. The bond, once completed, cannot be undone except through death. I know, Elowen said quietly. She rose from her chair and moved to the window, looking out over the darkening forest. But we have less than a month. If this is the only way to ensure my wolf emerges in time, it is not the only way, Rurik interrupted. It is the fastest way, the most certain way. But if you need more time, if you are not ready, we will find another solution. Alowen turned to face him, studying the man who had become so central to her existence in such a short time. He stood before the fire, the flames casting his features in sharp relief, and she saw not the cold Alpha King the court feared, but someone who carried his own burdens, his own fears, his own desperate hope that this impossible situation might somehow work. Are you ready? She asked. To bind yourself permanently to a Packless Omega, who may never be the queen everyone expects? Rurik crossed the room to stand before her, close enough that she could feel the heat of his body, could see the gold flecks in his amber eyes. My wolf chose you, he said simply. In that moment when you fell against me, everything I thought I knew about fate and duty and political necessity became irrelevant. There was only you, and the absolute certainty that you were mine. So yes, Elowen Thornevale, I am ready. The question is whether you are ready for me. She thought about her attic room and her invisible life, about Margit's kindness and the herbs in her basket. She thought about the girl she had been, afraid and alone and content with the small mercies of survival. And then she thought about who she might become if she was brave enough to reach for more. I am ready, she said, and was surprised to find she meant it. The completion of a mate bond was both ritual and intimacy, magic and biology intertwined. Rurik explained it carefully, his voice steady even as his eyes betrayed his hunger. They would need privacy, time, and the light of the moon to sanctify the union. The new moon was in 3 days, perfect for a beginning, for the creation of something new. Those 3 days passed in a haze of anticipation and preparation. Rurik cleared his schedule entirely, informing the council only that he would be unavailable for personal matters. The court gossiped, of course, speculation running wild about what the Alpha King and his Packless mate might be doing behind closed doors. Lady Serane's fury was palpable, but she could do nothing except wait and watch and plot. Elowen spent the time in study and meditation, trying to prepare herself mentally and emotionally for what was coming. Corvain visited once more, bringing herbs that would ease the transition, that would help her body accept the bond without being overwhelmed by it. He said nothing about the decision they had made, but his eyes were kind when he looked at her, and she thought perhaps he understood better than most what it meant to take such a leap of faith. On the night of the new moon, Rurik led her to a private chamber she had not seen before, accessible only through a hidden passage behind the main bedroom. It was smaller than his sleeping quarters, but no less beautiful, with walls of smooth stone hung with tapestries depicting wolves running beneath the moon. A bed dominated the center of the space, draped in furs and linens of midnight blue. Candles flickered throughout the room, their flames casting dancing shadows, and through the open windows, she could see the stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. "This was my mother's room," Rurik said quietly. She used it when she needed solitude, when the weight of being queen became too much. "I have kept it sealed since her death, but it seemed right to bring you here, to create something new in a space that has known only loss." Elowen's throat tightened with emotion. "Thank you," she whispered, "for sharing this with me." Rurik turned to face her fully, and she saw vulnerability in his expression, carefully controlled but present. "I need you to understand something before we do this," he said. "I have taken lovers before. It was expected, even necessary for an unmated Alpha King to demonstrate virility and interest in such things. But I have never completed a bond. I have never given myself to anyone the way I am about to give myself to you. So if I seem uncertain, if I falter, it is not because I do not want this. It is because I want it too much, and that terrifies me." She crossed the space between them and took his hands, feeling the tremor in his fingers that matched her own. "I am terrified too," she admitted, "but I think perhaps that is appropriate. This is not something to be undertaken casually." He lifted her hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles with a gentleness that made her heart ache. "Then we will be terrified together." What followed was both more and less than Elowen had imagined. There was awkwardness, yes, the fumbling of two people learning each other's bodies for the first time. But there was also tenderness, a careful attention to her comfort and pleasure that surprised her. Rurik was patient, guiding her through each stage, ensuring she was ready before progressing. When he finally claimed her fully, his eyes never leaving hers, she felt it, the moment the bond snapped into place like a key turning in a lock. It was not the gentle acknowledgement she had expected, but a fierce, overwhelming connection that blazed through every nerve in her body. She gasped, her back arching, and Rurik caught her, holding her steady as the bond settled into place. And then she felt it, his wolf, powerful and ancient, calling to hers across the barriers that had held it suppressed for so long. The resonance Corvain had described was not subtle. It was a thundering demand, an imperative that her wolf could not ignore. Deep inside her, past the layers of suppression and binding, her wolf threw back its head and answered with a howl that shook her to her core. The shift came without warning, without the usual gradual manifestation. One moment she was human, wrapped in Rurik's arms, and the next her body was changing, bones reshaping, skin giving way to fur. But unlike the painful, incomplete shifts she had experienced before, this one felt right, natural. Her wolf surged forward with a joy that was almost painful in its intensity. Finally, free after years of imprisonment. Rurik released her gently as her body completed the transformation, and she found herself standing on 4 legs for the first time in her life with full awareness and control. Her wolf form was smaller than Rurik's would be, she knew, but it was strong and healthy, and hers. She looked down at her paws, gray and white, with black markings around her legs, and felt tears prick her eyes even in this form. Then Rurik shifted beside her, his transformation as smooth and practiced as hers had been raw and new. His wolf was enormous, midnight black with those same golden eyes that had haunted her dreams, and when he lowered his head to press his muzzle against hers, she felt the bond sing between them, stronger than before, unbreakable and eternal. They spent the night in wolf form, running through the private garden that only Rurik could access, learning to move together, to hunt together, to exist as two halves of a whole. And when dawn broke and they shifted back to human form, tangled together in the furs of the hidden chamber, Elowen finally understood what Rurik had felt that day in the Great Hall. Certainty. Absolute, unshakable certainty that this was right. "I can feel you," she whispered against his chest. "The bond. It is like you are a part of me now. I can sense your emotions, your presence. Is this what you have felt all along?" "Yes," Rurik said, his arms tightening around her. "And now that you feel it too, now that the bond is complete, breaking it would destroy us both. So there is no going back, Elowen. Only forward. I do not want to go back," she said, and was surprised by how much she meant it. They remained in the hidden chamber for 2 more days, emerging only when absolutely necessary, losing themselves in the bond and each other. When they finally returned to the main chambers, Elowen felt transformed in ways that had nothing to do with her newly manifested wolf. She stood taller, moved with more confidence, met the eyes of those who had dismissed her with a steady gaze that challenged them to underestimate her again. The change did not go unnoticed. The court buzzed with speculation about what had happened during the Alpha King's seclusion, and when Elowen appeared at Rurik's side for the first time at a formal dinner, the whispers intensified. She wore a gown of deep green silk that Rurik had commissioned for her, her hair arranged in an elaborate style that declared her status, and around her throat, visible to all, was the mating mark, the brand that appeared when a bond was completed. It was intricate and beautiful, silver lines that formed the shape of a wolf wreathed in thorns, a perfect merger of their 2 names and natures. Lady Serane's face went white when she saw it, and Councillor Dravos had to physically restrain his daughter from making a scene. The other noble families exchanged looks of shock and dismay, realizing that their window for intervention had closed. The bond was complete. Separating it now would kill both the Alpha King and his mate, and no council would dare vote for the death of their ruler, no matter how unsuitable they found his choice. But the whispers remained. A completed bond did not necessarily mean a viable queen. Elowen still had to prove herself at the lunar convergence, still had to demonstrate that her wolf was strong enough to hunt alongside Rurik's, that the bond would hold under pressure. Until then, she remained on probation in the eyes of the court. The remaining weeks passed quickly, filled with preparation for the convergence and increasingly bold attempts by Serane and her faction to undermine Elowen's position. Rumors circulated about her common birth, her lack of training, her inadequacy as a leader. Someone, Elowen suspected Serane, leaked information about her packless status to the outer packs, creating unrest about the legitimacy of her claim to be queen. Through it all, Rurik remained steady beside her, his presence a constant reassurance. And through the bond, she could feel his absolute conviction that they would weather this storm, that the convergence would prove to everyone what he already knew, that fate had chosen correctly. 3 days before the convergence, Master Corvain requested an urgent meeting. When he arrived, his expression was grave, and Elowen felt dread settle in her stomach. "I have completed my analysis of the suppression compound," he said without preamble, "and I have traced its origin." "Where?" Rurik demanded. Corvain laid a document on the desk, covered in chemical formulas and diagrams. "The compound is derived from a rare herb that grows only in one location in the Dominion, the sacred groves surrounding the Temple of the First Moon, the same temple where the convergence will be held." Elowen felt her blood run cold. "Someone at the temple has been suppressing my wolf?" "Not just someone," Corvain said grimly. "The compound requires specific preparation, knowledge of ancient alchemical processes that only a few individuals in the Dominion possess. And when I cross-reference that knowledge with access to the sacred groves..." He paused, his expression troubled. "There is only one person who meets all the criteria. High Priestess Moira, the guardian of the Temple of the First Moon." The room fell silent. The High Priestess was one of the most powerful figures in the Dominion, answerable only to the Alpha King himself, tasked with maintaining the sacred sites and conducting the ancient rituals that bound the packs together. If she had been deliberately suppressing Elowen's wolf, it implied a conspiracy that went far deeper than simple court politics. "Why?" Elowen asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would the High Priestess want to suppress my wolf?" "That is what we need to determine," Rurik said, his voice hard. "And we need to do it before the convergence. Because if Moira has been working against you, there is no telling what she might do during the ritual itself." They departed for the Temple of the First Moon the following morning, accompanied by a contingent of guards that Rurik trusted absolutely. The journey took 2 days through increasingly dense forest, following ancient paths that wound between trees so old they predated the Dominion itself. As they drew closer to the temple, Elowen felt her wolf growing restless, pacing inside her like a caged animal. "Do you feel it?" Rurik asked, riding beside her. "Yes," Elowen said. "It is like something is calling to me, but also warning me away. I cannot explain it." The Temple of the First Moon appeared suddenly through the trees, a massive structure of white stone that seemed to glow in the dappled sunlight. It was ancient beyond measure, its walls carved with symbols and stories from before the time of written history. And surrounding it were the sacred groves, trees twisted and gnarled with age, their branches hung with offerings and totems left by generations of wolves seeking the moon's blessing. High Priestess Moira waited for them on the temple steps, tall and imposing in her ceremonial robes. She was ageless in the way of powerful wolves, her hair silver, but her face unlined, her eyes a pale gray that seemed to see through flesh and bone to the soul beneath. "Alpha King," she said, bowing her head in acknowledgement. "And the young mate. Welcome to the Temple of the First Moon. We are honored to host the convergence ceremony." "High Priestess," Rurik said coolly, "we need to speak with you privately. Now." Moira's eyebrows rose slightly, but she gestured for them to follow her inside. The temple interior was vast and dim, lit only by shafts of sunlight that fell through openings in the roof to illuminate a central altar of black stone. The walls were covered in more carvings, depicting the history of the wolf packs, the great battles and alliances and betrayals that had shaped the Dominion. Once they were alone in a private chamber, Rurik wasted no time. "We know about the suppression compound. We know it originated from these groves. And we know you are one of the few with the knowledge to create it. So I am asking you directly. Have you been deliberately suppressing Elowen's wolf?" Moira was silent for a long moment, her gray eyes studying Elowen with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Finally, she spoke. "Yes." The admission was so blunt, so unapologetic, that it took Elowen's breath away. Rurik's hand went to the sword at his belt, his expression murderous. "Give me one reason why I should not execute you where you stand." "Because I did it to protect her," Moira said calmly, "and to protect the Dominion from the chaos that would have erupted if her true nature had been revealed before the proper time." "What true nature?" Elowen demanded, finding her voice. "I am Packless. I have no name, no heritage." "You are Elowen Silvermane," Moira interrupted quietly. "Last daughter of the Queen Pack, heir to a bloodline that was betrayed and destroyed by an Alpha King who feared their power. Your mother brought you to me as an infant, begging me to hide you, to suppress your wolf until the time was right for you to claim your heritage. And I have kept that promise for 24 years. The world seemed to tilt beneath Elowen's feet. That is impossible. The Queen Pack fell generations ago. There are no survivors." "There is one," Moira said, gesturing to Elowen. "Your mother was the last Queen Alpha, and she knew that her mate's brother, the previous Alpha King, planned to kill her and all her bloodline to prevent any challenge to his rule. So she made a choice. She brought you to me, had me place the suppression on your wolf so that no one would recognize you as a Silvermane, and then she returned to her pack to die alongside them so that their deaths would be witnessed and documented, so that everyone would believe the Silvermane line had ended." Elowen's legs gave out and she collapsed into a chair, her mind reeling. Rurik moved to her side immediately, his hand on her shoulder, the bond humming with his concern and confusion. "Why tell us this now?" he demanded. "Why not continue the suppression?" Because the time has come, Moira said simply. The Silvermane wolves were not just powerful. They were born to balance the Alpha Kings, to stand as equals and prevent any single ruler from becoming tyrannical. Your ancestor, the first Queen Alpha, was mate to the first Alpha King, and together they founded the Dominion on principles of shared power and mutual respect. But over the generations, that balance was lost. The Alpha Kings began to see mates as political tools rather than partners, and when the Silvermanes refused to accept that diminishment, they were destroyed. She looked at Rurik with those piercing gray eyes. But your wolf chose her, not because she is weak or convenient, but because the ancient magic recognized what you both are, an Alpha King and a Queen Alpha, brought together by fate to restore the balance that was lost. The convergence ritual will not just test your bond. It will awaken her fully, reveal her true nature, and either restore the Dominion to what it was meant to be, or destroy everything in the process. What do you mean, destroy everything? Rurik asked sharply. A Queen Alpha's power is immense, Moira said, but it requires control, training, understanding. Elowyn has had none of these things because the suppression kept her wolf dormant. When the ritual breaks the last remnants of the seal, and it will, because that is what the convergence is designed to do, her wolf will emerge fully. If she cannot control it, if the power overwhelms her, it could kill her. Or worse, it could turn her into something monstrous, a corrupted version of what a Queen Alpha should be. Elowyn felt sick. So I am to choose between remaining suppressed and dying from a broken bond, or releasing my wolf and potentially becoming a monster? No, Moira said, and for the first time, her expression softened. You are to choose to embrace who you were always meant to be. Your mother gave her life to ensure you survived. I have spent 24 years preparing for this moment, and your mate's wolf recognized you even through the suppression, because the bond between an Alpha King and a Queen Alpha transcends all obstacles. You are not choosing death or monstrosity, Elowyn Silvermane. You are choosing to become what you were born to be. The remaining 2 days before the convergence were a blur of revelation and preparation. Moira told Elowyn everything she knew about the Silvermane pack, about her mother's courage and her father's sacrifice, about the heritage that had been stolen from her and the power that waited to be claimed. She taught her breathing techniques, meditation practices, ways to channel the overwhelming force that would come when the seal finally broke completely. Rurik remained at her side through it all, the bond between them a constant source of strength. Through their connection, she could feel his absolute conviction that she would succeed, that she was strong enough to handle whatever came. And slowly, gradually, she began to believe it herself. The night of the lunar convergence arrived with a full moon that seemed impossibly large and bright, hanging in the sky like a silver coin. The entire court had gathered at the temple, nobles and warriors, servants and healers, every wolf in the Dominion who could make the journey. They assembled in the sacred groves, forming a massive circle around the clearing where the ritual would take place. Elowyn stood with Rurik at the edge of the clearing, wearing a simple white dress that Moira had provided, her feet bare on the sacred ground. She could feel the eyes of the court on her, feel their judgment and doubt and barely concealed hostility. Lady Seraine stood among the observers, her expression eager, clearly expecting this night to end in Elowyn's destruction. Moira appeared in her full ceremonial regalia, her silver hair unbound, her robes embroidered with moon symbols that seemed to glow in the ethereal light. "We gather tonight to witness the lunar convergence," she intoned, her voice carrying across the clearing, "to test the bonds of those newly mated, to ensure their strength and legitimacy. Alpha King Rurik Valamor and his mate Elowyn will hunt together beneath the light of the full moon, demonstrating their unity and compatibility. Should they succeed, their bond will be recognized by the Dominion. Should they fail?" She left the alternative unspoken. "Begin," Moira commanded, and the moon seemed to pulse with light. Rurik shifted first, his transformation as smooth as always, his massive black wolf form drawing gasps from the assembled court. He turned his golden eyes to Elowyn, and through the bond she felt his encouragement, his faith, his love. She closed her eyes and reached for her wolf, finding it not suppressed, but eager, waiting just beneath the surface. The shift came easily, naturally, her body flowing from human to wolf without pain or difficulty. But as her paws touched the sacred ground, as the full power of the moon's light washed over her, she felt something crack inside her. The last remnant of the seal Moira had placed so long ago, finally shattering completely. Power flooded through her like a dam breaking, overwhelming and terrifying and glorious. Her wolf form began to change, growing larger, stronger, silver fur taking on an ethereal glow that matched the moonlight. She felt ancient memories stirring, not hers, but her mother's, her grandmother's, the collective knowledge of generations of Queen Alphas flowing into her consciousness. For a moment, she teetered on the edge of losing herself, of being consumed by the power. But then she felt Rurik's presence through the bond, steady and certain, anchoring her to the present. His wolf pressed against hers, and together they ran. They hunted as one through the sacred groves, moving with a coordination that seemed impossible for wolves who had never hunted together before. Elowen felt her instincts taking over, her body knowing what to do even as her mind struggled to process the transformation she had undergone. They brought down a stag together, their combined strength and strategy making them formidable. And when they returned to the clearing with their kill, the assembled court fell silent. Elowen shifted back to human form, and the gasps that had greeted Rurik's transformation became cries of shock and awe. The mating mark on her throat had changed, the silver lines now glowing with inner light, and her eyes had taken on the same ethereal quality as her wolf's fur, marking her unmistakably as something more than an ordinary Omega. "Queen Alpha," someone whispered, and the title rippled through the crowd like wildfire. Moira stepped forward, and there were tears on her cheeks. "The balance is restored," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "After generations in darkness, the Dominion has its Queen Alpha once more." The court erupted in chaos, some wolves bowing immediately, recognizing the ancient authority, others protesting, demanding explanations, still others simply staring in shock. But Elowen barely heard them. She was focused on Rurik, who had shifted back and now stood before her with something like wonder in his eyes. "My queen," he said, and knelt. "My king," she responded, and helped him to his feet. "We rule together, or not at all." In the days that followed, the truth of Elowen's heritage became known throughout the Dominion. Some accepted it immediately, seeing it as a return to the old ways, the restoration of balance between Alpha King and Queen Alpha. Others resisted, clinging to the power structures that had served them well when queens were merely political tools. Lady Serene and her faction attempted a coup during the formal coronation ceremony, trying to seize power while the old guard was in disarray. But Elowen, now fully in command of her Queen Alpha abilities, crushed the rebellion without mercy, demonstrating that she was no weak Omega to be dismissed or destroyed. The Dominion learned quickly that their new queen was every bit as fierce as her mate, every bit as capable of ruling. Together, Elowen and Rurik began the work of transforming the Dominion, dismantling the laws that had weaponized mating bonds and bloodline purity, creating new structures that valued strength and merit over ancient prejudices. It was slow work, meeting resistance at every turn, but they persevered. And through it all, Elowen never forgot the girl she had been, the packless orphan in the attic room, harvesting herbs and dreaming of nothing more than survival. That girl had been forced to become something greater, not because she sought power, but because fate and necessity had demanded it. And in becoming a Queen Alpha, she had not lost that girl, but had given her a voice, a purpose, a chance to ensure that no other packless wolf would ever again be dismissed as worthless. She stood on the balcony of the royal chambers one evening, looking out over the Dominion she now ruled, and felt Rurik's arms wrap around her from behind. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. She thought about her invisible life, about the cold and the hunger and the loneliness. She thought about the attic room and Margit's kindness and the small satisfactions that had sustained her. "No," she said finally, turning to face him. I did not choose this path, but I choose to walk it, with you." And as they stood together beneath the light of the rising moon, Queen Alpha and Alpha King, mates and equals, Elowen Silvermane finally understood what Margit had tried to teach her so long ago, that survival was not enough, that life demanded more than simply enduring. It demanded courage and hope, and the willingness to become something greater than you ever thought possible. The ceremony that had been meant to claim her had become the moment she claimed herself. And in doing so, she had transformed not just her own fate, but the future of every wolf in the Dominion who had ever been told they were not enough. She was enough. She had always been enough. She had simply needed the chance to prove it.